This one seems like an alien story at first, but it isn't your standard UFO encounter. Location: near Cao Bang, North Vietnam at the time. Date: August 12th to 13th, 1968. A group of Soviet engineers were working in this region hoping to build a hydroelectric power plant, when they heard a rumbling of engines overhead. They all ran out of their tents and were surprised to see a black, diamond-shaped object hovering in the sky, emitting a greenish-blue light. Moments later, the diamond-shaped object was struck by a fiery object that seemed to come from out of the earth. There was a bright flash, followed by a powerful shock wave that knocked the Russians down, tore their tents apart, and swept away their equipment. Somehow, no one was seriously hurt, but the explosion deeply troubled everyone. For several hours, all the radio and communication equipment was down, and they had to wait until morning to report the incident to their superiors. They promised to prepare a full report on the incident. 2 days later, the scientists found a black sphere-shaped object, about 3 meters in diameter, a short distance from camp. The surface of the sphere was completely black, and reflected no light. Even stranger, the sphere did not cast a shadow. The rays of the sun seemed to go around and right through the object, falling on the high grass all around it. The scientists also noticed that the sphere was cool and slippery, as if doused with soapy water. One of the men attempted to scratch the surface of the sphere with a sharp knife to no avail. They notified their superiors about their strange finding, and soon afterwards, the group received instructions to set up a protective perimeter around the object and to guard it until a special group arrived. They were strictly warned not to get within 20 meters of the sphere, so the entire group, 5 men total, camped exactly 20 meters away from the sphere. They had no idea what the sphere could be and guessed it was some kind of new weaponry. After building a small bonfire, the men sat down to rest. One of the specialists, Boris Ivanov, wrote in his diary that the men rested uneasy, staring at the object with their carbines ready, just in case. As they waited for the Special Forces group to eventually show up and take control of the situation. Soon one of the men, Vyacheslav, stood up and walked into the brushwood, which was in the direction of the sphere. The rest barely noticed, thinking he was just walking off to relieve himself. When he didn't return, the men began to nervously call out his name, but there was no response. They searched the area with flashlights, but could not find Vyacheslav. Concerned and afraid, the rest of the men eventually gave up and returned to the bonfire. An hour later, another man named Peter silently rose and also walked into the brushwood, in exactly the same direction that Vyacheslav had taken. He seemed to move uncomfortably, rocking back and forth, as if very drowsy. A kind of anxiety suddenly enveloped the rest of the men, and they remained sitting by the bonfire, unable or unwilling to intervene. Peter never returned. This time the remaining men did not search for Peter, but simply sat and waited. A feeling of doom filled the men. 2 hours later, Vladimir walked off in the direction of the sphere. It was obvious that he had no control. It was as if something were forcing him away from the bonfire. He also never came back. Now only 2 men remained, Boris and Sergei. Both were frozen with fear, refusing to move in the slightest from their positions. Suddenly, Sergei's face became distorted. He stood up like a marionette and meandered away into the dark, in the direction of the strange sphere. Moments later, Boris began to feel his body losing its terrified stiffness and beginning to move. Terrified, he grabbed his carbine and shot himself on the leg so that he wouldn't walk away to an uncertain fate. As a result of the pain, he passed out. This action possibly saved Boris. He woke up in the morning when the specialists arrived. They found him half-conscious by the now extinguished fire. He had lost a lot of blood but was still alive. However, the sphere had disappeared along with his comrades. He was soon thereafter evacuated from the area. But the event left him convinced that the sphere had been responsible for the disappearance of his friends.